All right, my friends, I've never been a fan of fakery, of hoaxes, of people who lie, just fakery in general. I am not who I am because and I need to lie about it, or I don't know. I just can't stand it. Never liked it, ever, ever, ever. I just feel we'd all be better off if people just be who they are, accept who themselves for who they are, and accept others for who they are. And so I do a lot of attention on financial planning fakery and financial planning misrepresentation for sure. But another pet peeve of mine is the client science for sure. I find it to be incredibly just misleading, and they're preying on the fear, just like financial. It's the same exact concept. We're going to prey on the fear of the average person who's just trying to get by. And we're going to make them so scared that they throw up their hands and say, we got to do something. And that something is going to turn over to somebody else who's going to benefit financially. That's exactly what's happening in financial business. It's exactly what's happening in climate science. And it happens in nutrition science. It's happened all over the course of mankind and forever will be. But as long as I have an opportunity, I'm going to call it out. So I want to read this article, and some of you will get pissed off at it. Frankly, whatever. If you can't take the other side of the opinion, then so be it. This is from powerlineblog.com, and the author, John Heinderich, or I don't know how to pronounce his last name, and I've been reading Powerline for a long time. I think 3 or 4 law school attorneys and whatnot, just great guys. A huge fan of a Powerline blog. It's probably my number 2 blog that I go to in the morning. Insta Pundit is another law school professor, actually Glenn Reynolds over at Insta Pundit from the University of Tennessee. I'll add that 2 or 3, 4 of my favorite blogs: Legal Insurrection, instapundit.com, Powerline blog, and then Tax Law Prof. 4 of my top probably 10 blogs are run by law professors. There's a couple of more client scientists I follow quite a bit, as a matter of fact. But in this regard, I want to read this piece because I think it's critical that you are at least made aware that there might be a different perspective when it comes to climate change. Remember, at the end of the day, what the people scream bloody murder for is that they say CO2, man-made, it's called AGW, CO2 is causing is a greenhouse gas, all right, and methane is another one. Methane is actually significantly bigger than CO2, carbon dioxide. But carbon dioxide is causing greenhouse gases, which is contributing to global warming due to industrial age, without question. And so thus, the answer is we need to limit, if not reduce, CO2 emissions. Now, the irony of it all is that this never escapes me, is when I hear these people say this, they still fly all over the place. And the 2 biggest culprits of CO2 is transportation. Number one, and by far and away, flying in your airplane is a huge emitter of CO2. There's no getting around that. So if you believe that CO2 is a problem and you're flying in an airplane, then you are inherently a fake, because you can't make those two, you cannot square that circle. It's impossible. You can't say, I'm going to fly to Davos and talk about the nature of global warming and how CO2 is going to kill us all, and I'm going to fly to Davos. You can't do that. You just simply can't do that. And second one's a cruise. You can't get on a cruise, a Norwegian, whatever it's called, cruise ship, and say that you're advocating for climate change and CO2 reduction. Those 2 things can't happen. Just the amount of emissions of carbon dioxide between those 2 sources is mind-boggling, insane. And if you're going to do that, you are a hypocrite, unless you're ignorant about it, which I think a lot of these people are. So anyway, the whole thing with CO2 is, my plants like CO2, your plants like CO2. There is a significant greening in the U.S., or not the U.S., the world. It cannot be attributed to CO2 increases. I absolutely believe that, without question. Is that caused by man, i.e. the industrial age, or not? We don't know. I mean, the idea that we have 50 or 70 years of records to prove is silly. Come on. Anyway. But the climate research industry, East Anglia University, the Center for Climate Research Unit, CRU, and I've drawn the blank, the dude's name off the top of my head there, which I can't believe I forgot. Anyway, these guys are the hide the decline, notorious for hide the decline. And so we have the greatest scandal in the history of science. And I'm going to talk about this because it's incredibly, incredibly interesting, incredibly important for you to maybe consider a different point of view, or if you at least be armed with what's going on out there, because it's like Stalinistic stuff here. Things are being erased from the history, and it's scary, without question. All right, so here's my man, John Hinderocker, and he says, I've written many times about the unwarranted adjustments. Let me see if I can't make this bigger. Yeah, here we go. And I just saved this to my heart, to a Word doc, because when I have it up on the URL, just is slow. The unwarranted adjustments to measured past temperatures by government agencies, which serve to inflate the modest warming that has occurred in recent decades. Organizations around the world, NOAA and NASA, here in the U.S., have done this over and over, usually surreptitiously. The Manhattan Contrarian shares my opinion that this misrepresentation of the historical record is the worst scandal in the history of science. I'm not sure I'd go that far, because I look back at my man Ignaz Semmelweis. That's a pretty big scandal. I look back at the Ansel Keys 7 country study is a pretty big scandal. We got lots of scandals of science for sure, and they've only just begun. But this is big. And this is big, and this is certainly the worst scandal that we're dealing with right now. And I also look at the people who are in favor of punishing. I mean, literally putting people in jail for denying AGW. I mean, it's scary stuff. And then, of course, what they say to the women it's just bad stuff they're saying about women who oppose their points of view, and yet the feminists are quiet on this. It actually sickens me without question. As a dad of 2 daughters, the idea that they could go in a science, have a different opinion, be called, just bad things. Let's put it that way. Just because they're women, I don't know how that's not. You talk about misogynist. I don't get why that's not being called out, but it's not being called out because the money flows one way, and people want the money, and they will do whatever they got to create the false narrative to get that money. The most recent instance comes from Australia. So my man Flower Grower Smith down there in the great state of the great country of Australia. Never been there, but here you go. For those new to this topic, the great scientific fraud of all times is a systematic downward adjustment of earlier temperatures in order to create a fake enhanced warming trend. The better to bamboozle voters and politicians to go along with extreme measures to try to avert the impending climate crisis. Kind of reminds me of the Michael Bellis's art book he had written about how the founders weren't big on firearms. He was called. Thankfully, the NRA said, dude, you're making crap up. And he's since been, kind of sent off to a less polite society. But, he'll make a comeback, as Dorrance Kearns Goodwin did as well. A lot of these fakers always come back because they fake one way and they know who butters their bread, which isn't the deniers, the people, the knuckle draggers on the skeptic side. The website, Joanne Nova, huge fan of Joanne Nova. I'm linked up to her on LinkedIn, and I follow her on Facebook. You should too. Nova's February 17th post is titled, History Keeps Getting Colder. Acorn 2 raises Australia's warming rate by over 20%. Acorn 2 is a newly revised and updated temperature series for Australia, with temperatures going back to 1910 based on records from 112 weather stations on the continent, some 57 of which have records that go back all the way to 1910 start date. The Acorn 2 data compilation is so called to distinguish it from Acorn 1, which was only released 7 years ago in 2012. So we got Acorn 1 released in 2012, followed by Acorn 2, which is just released. And let's keep reading. Once again, we find the oldest thermometers were apparently reading artificially high, even though many were newish in 1910 and placed in approved Stevenson screens. This is also despite the additional urban warming effect of a population that grew by 400% since. What are the odds? The new Acorn version has nearly doubled the rate of warming in the minima of the longest running stations. We got a bar chart that shows how the Australian government's adjustments have artificially inflated the warming trend. So watch this. We got Acorn 1, Acorn 2, and you can read. I'll put a link to the show notes of the article here. Each round of adjustments has increased the warming trend. So remember, Acorn 1 came out in, 2007. That wasn't good enough. And now we got Acorn 2, which makes the it was a whole lot colder in 1910 than it was today, even though we do have empirical evidence of sailors going up to the Arctic and saying, man, the ice is melted here. We didn't think we were going to be able to get through. I mean, this is literally real live contemporary writings in late 1800s, 1900s, these whaling ships and things of that nature, and exploratory vessels going out there to say, whoa, where's the ice? We thought there would be ice. Interesting, huh? Another Australian named Gillam has also worked to uncover the shenanigans of Australia's Bureau of Meteorology, the ABM. He created this chart, which plots the original raw temperature records against Acorn 1 and 2. He can plainly see how those responsible for the records have systematically lowered the measured temperatures of early years in order to deflate the warming of recent years. And you can, again, I'm not going to go by too much in this, but Australia's 57 stations average annual minimum Acorn 1 and 2 versus the raw, and you can just read all this if you like, but at the end of the day, they're making the older years cooler to accentuate the warming now. So I mean, this is exactly what's happened. Remember, Stalin said it's not the votes who matter, it's who counts the votes who matter. And this is what's happening here. It's not the numbers that matter. The real numbers is who produces the numbers that matters. And that's why I get calls crap out, because at some point, this will be as ingrained in our history as the idea that the dude who killed Kennedy was a right winger from Dallas. He's absolutely not. He's the first thing. What the hell's his name? Lee Harvey Oswald. He's certainly not a right winger. He's a commie. He's a commie. He lived in Cuba, for heaven's sake. A commie. But yet that's what the mainstream media would love for you to believe, that right wingers in Dallas, Texas killed JFK. Nope. Because JFK was an anti-communist. The contrarian comments. As you can see, the raw and V1 temperatures tend to be close, sometimes one higher, sometimes the other, but V2 is significantly lower across the board in earlier years. Then suddenly, in recent years, it tracks the raw almost perfectly. So here's the almost perfectly tracking the raw, and here it is, it's significantly lower, and this is V2 version 2. So here it's tracking it almost verbatim. Look at that. Look at that. Nice, huh? That's 2012. A little bit lower there. And so, but look at significant reductions in 1970, significant reductions in 1918. I mean, just look at those. It's like reduced every single year except recently, isn't it? Oh, all right, so let's keep going. One amusing aspect of the story is the explanation for the latest revisions given by the creators of Acorn 2. It is, in a word, incoherent. The contrarian elaborates. The one-word explanation is homogenization. Okay, we understand what that is. For example, sometimes a station moves, and that causes a continuity where, say, the new location is systematically 1 degree Celsius lower than the old. An adjustment needs to be made. But these sorts of adjustments should cancel out. How is it possible that every time some official meteorological organization anywhere in the world makes some of the homogenization adjustment, the result is always that earlier years get colder and the supposed global warming trend gets enhanced? Always, not on occasion, always. How is that possible? Good question. Here, the Australian Board of Meteorology has released a 57-page explanation of why it altered the historical temperature record. As far as I'm concerned, this is the definitive proof of the fraud. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is the definitive proof of the fraud. If this were even an attempt at real credible science, the proponents would put out a document complete with the details of the adjustments. And, of course, the computer code, which who did not do that? Hockey stick author Michael Mann, guy up in Canada, McIntyre, wanted to see the code. Couldn't get it. Had to file FOIA. Still couldn't get it. Couldn't get it. Interesting, huh? Just show the code, show the data, as the CPS did, the Consumer Population Survey did. They show the data. A couple research said this data is jacked, and now the Social Security Administration is saying, yeah, you're right, it's jacked. We're not going to use that data anymore until we can figure out how to fix it. Yay for them, nay for these guys, so that an independent researcher can replicate. So again, the proponents would put out a document complete with the details of the adjustments and all their computer code so that an independent researcher could replicate their work. Nothing like that is here. They just got some 57-page mumbo jumbo so they can say scientists say this to appeal to the authority. Let's see. This is pure ballygab. I guess that's a word in Australia. I don't know what it is. Nova calls it impenetrable, which is way too nice a word for, as far as I'm concerned. Simply we can't, it's not going to give you the ability to replicate their info because they don't want you to have that ability. And thus they think most people would just go along with their day-to-day lives and appeal to the authorities. Scientists say, 97% of climate scientists say XYZ AGW is happening. We know that to be a bold-faced lie, but John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Obama all cited that as their need to basically shut down coal plants, which, there you go. He includes an excerpt from I think this is pretty funny. He includes an excerpt from the ABM's document that amply justifies that assessment that this is bullcrap. It is actually pretty funny. Reading like one of the parody articles that Steve has so much fun with, the one that gets published in peer-reviewed journals, even though they are pure nonsense, larded with cliches. The excerpt, watch this. The excerpt from the ABM's explanation of its work concludes with this. All these methods, which use different statistical approaches, have been successfully used across a range of networks since their development. Further details on their implementation are given in Appendix C. So all these methods, we're not going to show you what the methods are. We're not going to share the data. We're not going to let you replicate it, but trust us, all these methods which use different statistical approaches have been successfully used across a range of networks since their development, and you can find implementation are given, details on the implementation are given in Appendix C, but watch. My favorite part is a reference to the end in Appendix C. There has no Appendix C. There are 3 appendices, 1, 2, and 3. That's about the intellectual level we are dealing with. There's no Appendix C. It's just a typo, Josh. If they can make a typo on this in their defense of their crappy data, what else they got typos in? I don't think there's any mystery at all about why employees of government agencies around the world systematically alter historical records. Amazingly enough, always in one direction, but the contrarian draws a parallel I think is apt. And finally, over the years, as I've accumulated posts on this topic, several commenters have suggested I must be alleging some kind of conspiracy among government climate scientists in making these adjustments. I mean, without that, how does one come about that the Australians just happen to be making the same kind of adjustments as NASA, NOAA, and for that matter, the Brits at the Hadley Center in the UK or the East? I think the Hadley Center is actually the East Anglia CRU. If your brain is wondering how that could be, I would suggest that we have the same kind of phenomenon going on here as a hate crime hoax phenomenon. How does Jussie Smollett just happen to fake a hate crime playing right into the progressive narrative of the moment? Just as the Duke lacrosse team hoaxer, the Virginia fraternity hoaxer, the Harvard Law School black tape hoaxers, and many dozens of others that gives a compilation of many hate crime hoaxes that are out there. Do they all coordinate in one grand conspiracy, or do they just all realize what was needed from them to support their team and its narrative? And of course, my man Hinder Rocker says there's a great deal of narrative going on these days, supporting the narrative going on. I couldn't agree more. So the narrative's coming out. Look, I'm telling you, at the end of the day, this is why I have a skeptical mind, because you can't trust any of these guys. No other way around it. And just going back to the idea, I'm a scientist, a PhD, and I cannot tell you how many debates I've gotten into with the scientists say this. You're like, did they actually say that? And all scientists say that. Do all scientists actually say that? And the ones who don't aren't scientists, according to someone on Facebook. The whole thing is fake. And then you can see the level of their ignorance because they come at you angry. Not reasoned debate, but angry, throwing names out there, diatribes, how stupid you are. Basically, the lowest common denominator. They always use that, the LCD. You're just part of the lowest common. It's just as cliches across the board. And climate scientists, my friend, science is an area that unfortunately we could poo-poo, but there's so much money at stake. Just look at the Green New Deal. Not only money at stake, but your ability to live free is at stake if these guys get too far down the road, and we got to challenge them. Yes, this is somewhat political. I get it. Should you waste electricity? No. Should you change the light bulbs to LED lights from incandescent? Yes. Should you fly? Well, you shouldn't if you truly believe CO2 is an issue. If you don't believe CO2 is an issue, then fly. I don't care. But at the end of the day, it's your ability to determine for yourself what you should do. Not being told from a command control government, which is what these people want. Just look at Ocasio or Cortez's Green New Deal. It ain't freedom, my friends. Nothing free in there. And it's based on stuff like this, which is junk science. The largest science scandal in history, without question. We'll see you next time. Thanks.